We tend to view stand-up comedy as an exercise in pure confidence. The assumption is that you just walk up to the microphone and recite a string of disconnected, generic one-liners. That illusion is sustained by established performers who possess immense stage presence. Comedians with incredible delivery rely heavily on the music of their voice, using vocal inflections to elevate material that might otherwise lack architectural structure. Meet Joseph. He is preparing to do stand-up for the very first time, and like many beginners facing an open mic, he isn't entirely sure how to fill his time on stage. His initial strategy is highly mechanical. He plans to walk out, adopt a grumpy, standoffish tone, and simply fire off a series of prepackaged, punchy responses to see what gets a laugh. But as he begins assembling these lines, he discovers a mechanical flaw in the process. A rapid-fire list of random observations about dating or search engines falls completely flat because the jokes lack a specific, grounded perspective. The audience has no character to hold on to. True comedic routines cannot be assembled from random thoughts. Finding the funny requires the rigorous discovery of a cohesive, underlying psychological persona. Joseph finds a breakthrough in a bit about an insect. He starts with a grumpy complaint about seeing a spider in his house, but mid-sentence, his tone completely shifts. He greets the spider warmly, welcoming it like an old family friend. This chart shows the exact comedic tension. The line sits at a hostile baseline, then spikes into extreme warmth. This shift works because Joseph casually notes he knew the spider's great-great-grandfather, presenting himself as a patient immortal living on a centuries-long timeline. That exact same psychological DNA appears in his complaints about technology. He tells a story about refusing to switch to an Android phone, even though Siri constantly malfunctions and fails to understand his commands. He compares his refusal to abandon Siri to the blind devotion of a specific type of sports fan. He holds on to a lost cause out of sheer, stubborn loyalty, viewing his patience with a broken app as practice for supporting himself. Then there is his game called Duck, Duck, Dash. The rules are absurd. He orders DoorDash, tells the driver they are racing back to his house, and runs there on foot while the driver takes their car. The punchline hits when the driver arrives. Regardless of who wins the race, Joseph looks them in the eye and refuses to pay. He does this entirely to study their reaction, revealing his persona as a quiet researcher of human behavior. Greeting spiders, sticking with malfunctioning voice assistants, and racing delivery drivers have nothing to do with each other on the surface. But when filtered through the perspective of a patient, unbothered researcher, they form a highly unified comedic voice. The traditional path for testing new material requires walking into an established live club and surviving the pressure cooker of a potentially hostile crowd. Joseph builds a different laboratory. He creates a digital-first ecosystem called Box 2 to stream his material, alongside a workshop concept he calls Heckle Camp. Heckle Camp acts as controlled exposure therapy. The audience consists entirely of fellow comedians who throw out simulated hostility, letting the performer practice under fire while knowing the hecklers are actually peers. This setup creates a massive systemic advantage. Instead of treating a random live crowd as the ultimate judge of his worth, Joseph treats his audience as subjects in a psychological experiment. Bypassing the traditional club circuit gives a creator the necessary space to protect and test a fragile comedic philosophy before exposing it to the masses. This testing leads Joseph to a deeply personal story about his car. He talks about having to walk to a comedy club because his 2019 vehicle is on its second engine replacement. But the punchline arrives when he admits his real problem. The last time the car was in the shop, he discovered his windshield wipers had been the wrong size the entire time. This diagram of an iceberg illustrates how the joke operates. The tip above the water represents the mundane mechanical failures of the vehicle. That is the surface-level setup designed to misdirect the audience. The comedic logic here rests on the distinction between the engine and the glass. While the engine failure is the loud, catastrophic crisis, the incorrectly sized wipers represent a quiet, systemic dysfunction that went unnoticed for months. Joseph identifies this as the reality of marriage, a state where you don't notice you're using the wrong tools until the weather changes and you suddenly can't see the road. This observation reveals the psychological paradox driving his entry into comedy. Joseph spent his entire life trying to be taken seriously, leaning into difficult things just to earn respect. But he faced a painful irony. The harder he tried to be a serious person, the more the world treated him as a joke. He shares this specific burden with historical greats like Richard Pryor, performers whose finest work grew directly from personal tragedy. That painful truth became his ultimate motivation for picking up the microphone. He reasoned that if the world was going to laugh at his serious life anyway, he might as well get on stage and intentionally fail at being funny. Enduring stand-up comedy involves the courageous act of taking the tragic, deeply serious truths of one's own life and finally showing up to tell the story.